This video is an introduction to value for color theory at the Art Institute of Pittsburgh. My name is Robert Mazzaferro, and if you're unfamiliar with my videos, I'm going to take a minute and kind of introduce you to how these videos are set up. At this point, I don't assume that you're familiar with the software or that you've watched the other videos for this course, so this is kind of the basic setup for how I do things. Many of the videos start with the color window, which we'll use for many of the assignments. We'll often have layers in some of the later assignments. I'll often use them for the videos just to help save time, and sometimes I'll have a navigator here. I'm using it at this stage just to get you familiar with this. At this point, we're looking at a basic color wheel. What we have here is the toolbar. I have the eyedropper selected. We can see that this is starting at the top, a red, fully saturated. There's no white. We can see this by the S value being at 100%. The black is a little bit decreased, but we would say that this is there's no black either. So this is red is fully saturated. The hues are at 15-degree transitions. So this is fully saturated, 15-degree transition. So this would be our color wheel that we're going to look at. And what I want to focus on is the value here. We're not really looking at transitions of hue at this point. We're not really looking at the color wheel, but we're going to use it as our reference point. So at this point, we've established all the hues are fully saturated. I'm not going to have any tricks on you at this point in the videos. We're not going to do anything strange. So they're all fully saturated. And what we're going to see here is that this is a grayscale copy behind here. And we're going to see the variations in value. So we can see that the yellows are lighter in value. The blues are darker in value. And these are natural values that are the differences in the hues. Now, if you have trouble seeing some of these differences in value, there are tools available to help you. So we can bring back our color. We can go to the color window. We can switch this to the grayscale slider. So let me pull this in so you can see it a little better. We'll bring our color window in. Notice our swatches are behind. So we can bring our grayscale slider in, and we can take measurements of this. So we can see this is 52%. The K is standing for black. If you're in the course, we'll talk about this a little bit later. We can see the yellow, only 4%. Which is showing how light it really was. If we recall back, we'll see it was almost white. It really appeared very light in value. So what I want to start to talk about is these differences in value. And if you're taking the course, you'll see that when we start to deal with these tints, shades, and tones, and when we start to look at these variations in value and saturation of how different these can really be. And for right now, I really want to just focus on just tints and shades. Tones is really something a lot more that we'll talk in more detail in, and there are more videos posted about. But for right now, we want to take a look at these differences. So I'm going to select three hues, and I'm going to pick the extremes first. I'm going to start with yellow, and I'm going to start with blue. So selecting our yellow, we have we can notice here that it's selected here. We can see it in our color window. We can use our paint bucket tool. We can use a number of tools, and we'll get to those later. And I'm going to go ahead and fill it in. Now, there's a number of ways to do this. This is fairly simple, and for many of these introductory courses, I'm going to keep things very simple. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take tints to the left. I'm going to go shades to the right. So first, this is going to be our center point. We're going to go to the left here. I'm going to go to a magic wand, and I'm not too worried about presentation at this point, but I do want to start these smooth transitions, and I'm going to do 20% changes in lightness. So I'm going to go plus 20 here. And you may not notice these big changes with something that's already fairly light, such as a yellow. But we will see this a little bit better, remember, in our color window, which is our tool that we're going to use often to measure our color. So we're going 60, so this is 20, 40, 60, 80, 100 to make sure these are very even transitions, and we'll talk a lot more about even transitions throughout the course. But right now we're just creating some comparisons, and you can start to see how much that it's getting lighter, but you're going to see that this difference here over time. So let's go. We can also use the slider here. There's many sliders throughout Photoshop, but notice the difference as we're going towards white. Now when we go darker, this is where we'll see a big difference with yellow. So let's go ahead and select here. And this is also kind of giving you an introduction on how to do some of these. So we're going to go -20 this way to start to introduce this. Let's slide this down so you can see there. And what we're really focusing on at this point are these differences in value. And so you're going to notice that while these differences in the value of the yellow are not that extreme with the tints, the difference in the shades are going to be fairly extreme. But our comparison is going to be focusing on the extreme of the yellow and the blue, which are the lightest and darkest, and then we'll include a middle value hue as well. So -60. -80, excuse me there, and our last one being black. And I'll use the slider one last time there. So if we go back to our color window, let's go ahead and look here. We can see these additions of white and black. Remember, we referenced this early on, so go back to our eyedropper tool, shortcut I there. So this is our fully saturated hue in the center. We can see those 20% changes in the amount of white. So it's going 80 here in this first step, 60, we'll see the 40 there, 20, and then white here at the end. The black here at 0, there's the 20, 40, 60, and 80. And then once we finish these out, we'll go ahead and we'll look at this in grayscale, just as we did here with the color before. So let's go ahead and turn this off. I want to make these comparisons, but I want to finish these scales just so to get an idea if you can start to see these differences in value at this point. So let's go ahead and start with our blue here. Make sure we're on the correct layer. Let's go ahead and fill these all in. And it's the same basic process. I'm going to go a little quicker now because, again, this is focusing on value. You can look at tint shades and, of course, tones in the other videos. And with all of these, do like to keep them fairly smooth when possible. And so you'll notice with a dark hue like the blue how much difference that value is when it's going lighter. But when we start to go darker, we're not going to have that extreme difference. And I'm going to go ahead and pause this and do the middle hue. I'll go ahead and select red. I often try to stick with a basic hue because for those in the class, I prefer that you avoid using any hues that were used during a demonstration, just to try to something different. And so there would be your section of shades. So I went ahead and paused it as I mentioned, and here is the red section. And what some of you may have noticed is that while we measured that, and that seems to be very easy here, and the hue, saturation, and brightness sliders, HSB for short, why I showed the hue saturation tool is that it's a very functional tool, so it works for any situation. This tool here, the color window, may not work for some color that's not fully saturated. It's not as versatile. So the hue saturation tool will work for making a smooth transition in any situation. And we'll talk about that more later in other videos. So right now we have our differences here in our tints and shades for 3 different colors here. Red's fairly dark as well, but not quite as dark as the blue, and we can start to see some of those differences in value. So if we go ahead and turn off here we can look at these directly by themselves. Let me go ahead and select all these. I'm going to just copy them just for a minute, and I'm going to go to Image Mode Grayscale. Actually, I'll copy them at grayscale, And I wouldn't recommend this when you're working on a video to do this, to switch color modes, but for the assignments it's usually alright. It's not usually an issue, but for demonstration purposes I will often do this. So we'll go ahead and undo that, and then I'll go ahead and post the gray copy. So now we'll be able to look at those side by side. So let's go ahead to the gray copy. Let me hold on one second here. And so here's our differences here. This was our initial yellow, and this is the value of tint and shade in grayscale. And notice how light that tint range is, but how dark it gets when we look at it in grayscale. Notice the difference here with the blue. It's very dark with the shades, but it gets that nice range here with the tints. And so these are differences that I do want to start to point out. These are things that we're going to start to notice as time goes on. But these differences in values are something that we're going to continue to talk about, and this idea of tint and shade as value is something I really wanted to stress at this point. While this is not much of a range of value as a tint, it's still a part of the value range when we consider it as a whole, and it is something that we will discuss. This background here is a middle gray, and we're going to talk about that a little bit more, especially as we start to look at RGB values, and we can look at that a little bit here. Black is all three RGB values is 0, white is all three at 255, this middle gray here is 127. We're going to talk about this throughout the course, but it is something that at this point, when you're starting to look at value ranges, tints and shades, and especially as we do the tone assignment as well, to really pay attention to some of these values, because this is really the foundation of a lot of what we're going to be doing throughout the course. So I want to stress how important this is, and really take your time with this assignment and make some observations of what's happening with the color. Because throughout this is going to be very important to notice how we've taken some fully saturated hues in these gradations of hues and really altered them in very significant ways with very simple tools. So if you have any questions about any of this, feel free, let me know. We can definitely talk about it throughout the class. But I wanted to emphasize this aspect of value. It's a fundamental idea, and it's very important to kind of get an idea of how this will relate to this color wheel, which we'll talk about a little bit more next week. But it is being introduced here initially. And again, any questions, feel free, let me know. Thanks.